The children of Greystone House, far away from bustling roads and city lights, on a lonely hill surrounded by blackened trees, stood Greystone House. It was an old mansion with towers and sharp rooftops, once belonging to the wealthy Ramsey family. Now, it was abandoned, overgrown with ivy, as if the forest itself tried to hide it from human eyes. Locals whispered that the house was cursed, and those who dared enter never returned the same. One name lingered on everyone's lips: Emma Ramsey. The story tells that in the late 19th century, Emma, the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey, disappeared at the age of 8. Her parents were driven mad with grief. It's said they began hearing her voice at night, her songs echoing through the halls. Soon after, horrible events plagued the house. Servants vanished, guests stopped coming, and one freezing winter night, the Ramsey family disappeared without a trace. The house was sealed, forgotten, and fell into legend. Over the years, Greystone House became a local ghost story, but one detail remained consistent: the third-floor window. Sometimes, people claimed to see a small figure in a white dress watching silently with empty eyes. In 2021, a group of college students decided to create a documentary about the country's most haunted locations. Their leader, Eric, was a passionate ghost hunter. Alongside him were his friends Kate, Mark, Sarah, and Liam. "This will be our best project yet," Eric declared as they arrived at Greystone House. The mansion loomed before them, dark and cold, as if waiting. Shadows pooled on its walls, and the empty windows seemed to watch them. The wind whispered through the dead trees as they stepped onto the rotting porch. The front doors creaked open slowly, without anyone touching them. "That's just the wind," Liam muttered, though his voice trembled. Inside, the house was suffocatingly dark and heavy. The ceiling sagged, and the walls were covered in stains that, on closer inspection, resembled children's faces. The air was stale, carrying a smell of damp rot. The group split up to explore. Eric and Kate headed for the upper floors while Sarah, Mark, and Liam stayed on the ground floor. Eric's camera captured everything: the warped floorboards, the decaying furniture, and the shadows that seemed to move by themselves. Upstairs, they found a child's room. Toys were strewn across the dusty floor, dolls with empty eyes, wooden blocks, and a rusted music box. Eric wound the box, and a creaky melody began to play. But after a few seconds, the tune slowed, changing into something unnatural: soft voices, like children singing faintly from within the walls. Suddenly, the door behind them slammed shut. Kate jumped, rushing to pull it open. It wouldn't budge. Eric shone his flashlight around the room, and they both froze. The dolls, which had been scattered on the floor, were now sitting upright, all facing them. "Eric, they moved," Kate whispered. One doll tipped over with a thud. From behind the wall, they heard a voice: "Play with me." Downstairs, Sarah, Liam, and Mark heard the slam and the faint sound of footsteps echoing from the ceiling. "What's going on up there?" Mark muttered. The three of them hurried toward the staircase, only to stop when they noticed the painting above the fireplace. It showed a girl in a white dress, Emma Ramsey. Her dark, hollow eyes seemed to follow them wherever they moved. "She's here," Sarah said quietly, staring at the portrait. "Who's here?" Liam asked. Before she could answer, a sound came from the basement: slow, deliberate footsteps. "Someone's down there," Mark said, grabbing a flashlight. Without hesitation, Eric and Kate rejoined the group, pale and shaken. Together, they made their way toward the basement door. The wooden stairs creaked as they descended into the darkness. The basement was larger than expected, its walls covered in strange carvings and words: "Stay with us, listen to her." In the corner stood rows of tiny, rusted beds. At the center of the room sat a small rocking chair, creaking back and forth as though someone invisible occupied it. Eric stepped closer, but his flashlight flickered and died. The room fell into pitch darkness. In the silence, they heard breathing, deep, raspy, and cold. A sudden scream tore through the dark as Liam's voice cracked with fear. Flashlights flickered back on, and there, in the middle of the room, stood a figure, a little girl in a white dress. Her face was blank, her eyes black pits streaming dark tears. "She's looking at us," Sarah choked out, trembling. The girl raised her hand, and pointed to the far wall. Slowly, words began carving themselves into the stone, as though written by invisible hands. "You will never leave." The group turned and ran, but the house had changed. Hallways twisted in impossible ways. Doors led to brick walls, and shadows swarmed around them. "The house is alive," Kate screamed as they searched desperately for an exit. The walls began to pulse, like the house itself was breathing. The whispers grew louder, children's voices repeating words they couldn't understand. Mark tried to smash a window, but the glass rippled like water, reflecting twisted versions of their faces. From behind them came the sound of small footsteps, hundreds of them. When they turned, the shadows coalesced into dozens of figures, children with blank faces and empty eyes, moving toward them silently. "She's calling us," Liam said suddenly, his voice flat, his eyes glazed over. "Liam, snap out of it," Eric shouted, shaking him. But Liam broke free and walked toward the figures, disappearing into the shadows. "Run!" Eric screamed. The others bolted for the front door, which they saw suddenly reappear at the end of the hallway. The children's whispers rose to a deafening chorus. Shadows reached out from the walls, grasping at their legs and arms. Kate tripped, falling hard to the floor, as Eric and Sarah dragged her up. They burst through the front door into the cold night air. The silence outside was overwhelming, as if the house itself had swallowed its screams. When they looked back, the third-floor window glowed faintly. There, framed in the glass, stood Emma Ramsey, clutching a doll in her hands. Around her, faint shapes moved, other children, their hollow eyes watching. Eric looked at the camera he'd been holding. The screen flickered to life, showing the basement. In the footage, Emma stood silently, her face close to the lens, whispering something inaudible. Then, the screen went dark. The group left town the next day, but they could not forget Greystone House. Weeks later, Eric reviewed the footage again. He slowed it down, and listened carefully. This time, he could make out Emma's words. "Come back, we're waiting." He shut the camera off, but the whisper continued, soft and faint, as if it were coming from the room itself. Rumors spread that Greystone House was no longer silent. Travelers reported hearing laughter and crying from within, and some swore they saw small figures watching them from the windows. Those who dared return to the mansion never came back. To this day, locals avoid the hill, warning strangers, "She's still there, and she's never alone." The end.